On a cold evening in a quiet American neighborhood, a young woman stood at a stranger's door and signed 3 words that changed 5 lives forever. The wind moved softly through the bare trees of Maple Hollow Street, brushing against the small brick houses that all looked the same. Porch lights glowed warm against the early winter dark. Inside one of those homes, laughter from 2 young girls floated through the hallway. Outside that same door stood Ilara Quinn, her hands trembling slightly in the cold air. She had not planned to stop there. The package in her hand was meant for another address, 1 digit off from her own duplex across the street. But somehow, standing on that porch felt heavier than delivering mail. It felt like standing at the edge of something she had been avoiding for a long time. Ilara was 28, but the last 2 years had aged her in ways mirrors could not show. After the accident that took her hearing, her world did not shatter loudly. It went silent. The silence had been sharp at first, like falling into deep water, but what hurt more was not losing sound, it was losing people. Her fiancé, Grant Holloway, had promised patience in the hospital room. Over time, his visits grew shorter, his smiles tighter. He said he did not know how to help her anymore. Eventually, he stopped trying. Friends followed his lead in softer ways, texting less, inviting her out less, unsure how to act around someone who could not hear their jokes. Her parents lived 3 states away and spoke to her mostly through quick messages that felt polite but distant. Ilara moved into a small rented duplex in Maple Hollow because it was quiet and cheap. She told herself she liked being alone. It was easier than waiting for someone to leave. She spent her days doing remote graphic design jobs, her evenings eating dinner at a small kitchen table facing a blank wall. No television noise, no music, just stillness. She convinced herself she was strong, but deep down she felt invisible, unchosen, like a room people walked through without noticing. Across the street, Micah Rowan's life moved in a different kind of silence. He was 33, a widower raising twin 8-year-old daughters on his own. After his wife, Tessa Rowan, passed away from a sudden illness 3 years ago, the house had felt unbearably loud with grief. Micah had learned quickly that grief does not pause for children. Lunches still had to be packed, homework still needed checking, hair still had to be brushed before school. He worked long hours managing a hardware store, then came home to cook simple meals and fold small laundry. For a while, neighbors brought casseroles and offered help. But as seasons changed, visits became rare. People returned to their lives. Micah stayed. He refused to send Lyndon and Calla to live with relatives who offered to ease the burden. They were not a burden. They were his reason to keep going. Still, some nights after the girls were asleep, he sat alone at the kitchen table staring at Tessa's photo on the fridge, wondering if he was doing enough. The house survived loss, but it still felt incomplete. Lyndon and Calla Rowan were observant in ways adults often underestimated. Lyndon was thoughtful, always watching quietly before speaking. Calla expressed herself through drawing, filling notebooks with careful sketches of the world around her. They had grown used to their father's tired smile, and the way he sometimes looked out the window as if expecting someone who would never return. The girls did not complain. Instead, they learned to fill space with small kindnesses, cleaning up without being asked, leaving notes on Micah's desk, hugging him a little longer than necessary. That evening, when the doorbell camera lit up with motion, Micah assumed it was another delivery driver. He walked toward the hallway but stopped when he noticed something unusual through the frosted glass. The woman outside was not knocking. She was standing still, holding a package, her shoulders tight, the porch light illuminated her pale face and determined eyes. Ilara hesitated. She could have left the box at the door and walked away. That would have been easier. Instead, she raised her hand slowly and knocked once. When no one answered immediately, she swallowed hard and signed through the glass, not even sure why she was doing it. Her fingers formed the words clearly, almost painfully, "I'm alone." She did not expect anyone to understand. She did not even know why she had signed it. Maybe she was tired of pretending. Maybe she wanted to see what it felt like to admit it out loud, even without sound. Inside, Lyndon froze mid-step. Calla looked up from the living room floor. The girls stared at the door, then at each other. Without speaking, they moved closer. Micah watched from behind them, confused. Then, in careful, slightly awkward movements, Lyndon lifted her hands and signed back, "Not alone." Calla followed, her fingers slower but steady. Together, they repeated it, "Not alone." Micah's breath caught in his chest. He had no idea his daughters knew sign language. He remembered them spending time on educational websites, but he had thought it was for school projects. He had been so busy surviving that he had missed what they were learning. The girls were not smiling widely. They were serious, intentional, as if they understood that this moment mattered. Outside, Ilara stared at their hands. Her heart pounded harder than it had in months. Someone had answered her, not with pity, not with confusion, but with understanding. It should have comforted her. Instead, it frightened her. Being ignored was familiar. Being seen was dangerous. Micah slowly opened the door, the cold air rushing inside. He looked at Ilara with uncertainty, but also quiet respect. The girls stood on either side of him, hands still raised. For the first time in a long while, the silence between strangers did not feel empty. It felt full of something fragile. Ilara realized the girls understood her, but she didn't know why being seen felt more terrifying than being invisible. While others walked away from grief, Micah Rowan stayed. Even when staying broke him, before silence filled his house, Micah Rowan's life had once been low-viewed, in the best way. Tessa Rowan had been the kind of woman who knew everyone on their street by name. She hosted summer cookouts, remembered birthdays, and brought homemade soup to sick neighbors without being asked. The Rowan house used to glow with music playing in the kitchen, and the sound of twin girls chasing each other through the hallway. Micah often stood back and watched his wife move through those rooms like she carried light with her. He had always believed that as long as Tessa was there, everything else would work itself out. Her illness came quietly and moved fast. At first it was simple fatigue, then doctor visit, then hospital rooms that smelled too clean and too serious. Micah tried to stay calm for the girls, explaining things in soft voices while holding their small hands. Tessa smiled through her weakness, always telling them that love was stronger than fear. But love could not stop time. The day she passed, the house did not feel loud anymore. It felt hollow. The twins clung to Micah, and he held them tightly, even though he felt like he was falling apart inside. After the funeral, relatives spoke in careful tones. Some suggested that the girls might do better living with an aunt in another state. Others said Micah should consider taking time away from work and letting someone else handle daily routines. They called it help. To Micah, it felt like surrender. He understood their concern, but he refused to let grief scatter what little family he had left. Lyndon and Calla were not problems to be solved. They were his daughters. He promised himself that no matter how tired he became, he would stay. Staying turned out to be harder than he imagined. First night alone without Tessa's steady presence, Micah sat at the kitchen table long after the girls had fallen asleep. Bills were stacked beside him. School forms needed signatures. Laundry waited in the dryer. He did not know how to braid hair properly, but he learned by watching online tutorials after midnight. His fingers fumbled at first, but he practiced until he could send the girls to school with neat braids that stayed in place. He burned a few dinners before finding simple meals he could cook without thinking too hard. He attended school meetings, sometimes feeling out of place among parents who came in pairs, but he never missed one. In the beginning, neighbors stopped by often. They brought casseroles and soft hugs. They offered to babysit and mow the lawn. Micah was grateful, but as weeks turned into months, visits became less frequent. Life moved on for everyone else. The Rowan house remained in its quiet adjustment. Micah did not blame anyone. People have their own struggles. Still, he felt the slow fading of support like a door closing gently. He became quieter over time. Not cold, not angry, just careful. He measured his words. He guarded his heart. He did not build walls out of bitterness, but out of survival. If he allowed himself to feel everything at once, he feared he would not be able to stand back up. So he focused on routines. Wake up, make breakfast, pack lunches, work, pick up the girls, help with homework. Repeat. It was not glamorous, it was steady. Lyndon and Calla noticed more than he realized. They saw the way he rubbed his temples when he thought they were not looking. They heard the tiredness in his breathing at night when he sat on the edge of his bed. Instead of asking many questions, they adjusted in small ways. They cleaned up their toys without reminders. They learned how to fold their own clothes. When other kids at school talked about family vacations or weekend outings with both parents, the twins stayed quiet. They did not want their father to feel like he was not enough. In many ways, the girls became emotional gatekeepers of their home. They watched people closely. They could sense who carried real kindness and who carried curiosity. Micah trusted their instincts more than he admitted. If Lyndon frowned slightly when meeting someone new, he paid attention. If Calla smiled easily around a visitor, he relaxed a little. The twins had learned to protect their father's heart as much as he protected theirs. Now, standing in his hallway and watching Alara Quinn through the glass door, Micah felt something familiar in her posture. Her shoulders were tense, as if she expected rejection. Her eyes carried the same guarded look he saw in the mirror some mornings. It was the look of someone who had lost more than they planned to lose. He did not know her story yet, but he recognized the weight she carried. It was the weight of being left behind while the world kept moving. When Lyndon and Calla signed back to her without hesitation, Micah felt a mix of surprise and pride. His daughters had chosen to respond with kindness before he even understood what was happening. They did not hesitate. They did not judge. They simply answered her loneliness with presence. In that moment, Micah realized that staying had shaped them in ways he had not seen clearly before. His decision to remain, even when broken, had taught him how to remain for others too. He stepped closer to the door, his hand resting on the knob. He did not know what inviting this stranger inside might mean. He had spent years keeping his world small and controlled. Letting someone new step into it felt risky. Yet he also understood that healing rarely comes from isolation. The girls were watching him now, their eyes hopeful but calm. They were waiting to see what he would choose. Micah inhaled slowly. Staying had always been his answer to loss. Maybe now staying could mean something new. He turned the knob and opened the door slightly, just enough to let cold air mix with the warmth inside. Micah opened the door. Not fully, but enough to let something unexpected begin. Children see what adults try to hide, and these girls had been watching loneliness for years. Lyndon Rowan had always been the quiet one. She did not speak quickly, and she did not interrupt. Instead, she listened with her eyes. She noticed the way her father's shoulders dropped when he thought no one was looking. She noticed how he paused a second too long before answering simple questions, as if measuring his strength. Lyndon understood that grief did not disappear just because time moved forward. It simply changed shape. At 8 years old, she carried more emotional awareness than most adults around her. Calla Rowan was softer in a different way. She felt everything deeply, but expressed it through pictures instead of words. Her sketchbooks were filled with scenes from home, her father standing in the kitchen under warm light, her sister reading by the window, 3 stick figures holding hands under a big sky. Sometimes she drew a 4th figure, with gentle lines and curly hair, representing the mother they missed. Calla did not talk about loss often, but she carried it in colors and shapes. Months before Alara Quinn ever stood on their porch, the twins had experienced something that stayed with them. A new girl joined their class at school. Her name was Avery Cole, and she was deaf. On the first day, many children stared at her hands when she signed to the teacher's interpreter. Some kids were kind but unsure how to communicate. Others avoided her because they did not understand. Lyndon noticed the way Avery sat alone during lunch, not because she wanted to be alone, but because no one knew how to reach her. That afternoon, Lyndon came home thoughtful. She asked her father what it meant to be deaf. Micah explained as gently as he could, telling them that some people hear with their ears and others see the world in different ways. He encouraged kindness, as he always did. What he did not realize was how seriously his daughters would take that advice. Without telling him, Lyndon and Calla began watching simple American Sign Language videos online. They practiced after homework, sitting side by side at the dining table. At first, their movements were clumsy and slow. They giggled when they made mistakes, but they kept going. They learned basic phrases like hello, thank you friend, and not alone. They wanted Avery to feel included. They did not tell their father because they saw how tired he already was. They did not want him to feel like he had to help them with something extra. Over time, signing became something special between them. It felt like building a quiet bridge. They began using it at school to greet Ava. Eerie. Slowly, she started smiling more. She began sitting with them at lunch. The twins learned that kindness did not require big speeches. Sometimes it only required effort. So when Alara stood outside their door that evening and signed 3 small words, Lyndon recognized the motion immediately. It was not just the sign itself. It was the emotion behind it. The way Ilara's hands moved carried the same weight Lyndon had seen in Avery's eyes during that first lonely week at school. It was the weight of standing apart from everyone else. Lyndon did not look at her father for permission. She simply stepped closer to the glass and raised her hands. Her fingers shaped the reply carefully. Not alone. Kala joined her, repeating the words with steady determination. They did not smile widely or act excited. They answered as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Outside, Ilara froze. She had not expected understanding. Since losing her hearing and her fiancé, she had grown used to explaining herself, to writing things down, to watching people grow impatient. No one had responded to her in sign language since Grant slowly stepped out of her life. Seeing two small girls answer her so simply sent a wave of emotion through her chest. It was not loud. It was warm and unfamiliar. Inside the hallway, Micah felt confusion first. He did not know when his daughters had learned to sign, and he wondered how much he had missed while trying to survive each day. But confusion quickly shifted into something deeper. He saw what they were doing. They were opening a door in a way he had not known how to. They were acting as emotional gatekeepers once again, sensing safety before he could fully process it. They were deciding, in their quiet way, that this woman on the porch deserved compassion. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic music, no big speech. Just two small pairs of hands moving gently in the air. Unexpected kindness did not come from wealth or status or perfect timing. It came from children who understood loneliness because they had lived beside it. They knew that being left behind felt heavy. They also knew that answering someone's pain did not make their own smaller. It made the space shared. Ilara's eyes filled with tears she had not planned to show. She tightened her grip on the package in her hand, unsure what to do next. The house behind the glass looked warm. Family photos lined the wall. The twins stood steady, waiting. Micah remained just behind them, his expression thoughtful, cautious but not closed. In that moment, silence stopped feeling like absence. It became connection. No one spoke, yet everything important was understood. The girls had built a bridge without asking for recognition. They had chosen compassion without knowing her story. They did not see a stranger. They saw someone standing alone. Ilara shifted her weight slightly, her heart beating harder. Stepping inside would mean accepting their answer. It would mean risking attachment. It would mean allowing herself to believe that maybe she did not have to disappear to survive. Ilara hesitated at the threshold, because stepping inside would mean risking rejection all over again. Rejection doesn't always shout. Sometimes it teaches someone to disappear. Before the accident, Ilara Quinn had been the kind of woman who filled rooms with easy laughter. She worked as a junior designer at a busy marketing firm in downtown Portland. Her days were loud with office chatter, ringing phones, and music playing softly from someone's desk. She was engaged to Grant Holloway, a man who once told her he admired her energy and independence. They had planned a small wedding by the lake. Ilara used to believe her life was moving forward in a straight, steady line. The accident changed more than her hearing. It changed how people saw her. At first, Grant stayed close. He sat beside her hospital bed and squeezed her hand. He told her they would adjust together, but adjusting turned out to be heavier than he expected. Communication slowed. Conversations required patience. Simple things like watching movies or talking in the dark before sleep became complicated. Grant began working later hours. He stopped meeting her eyes when she signed. He said he felt helpless, but what Ilara heard was distance. The breakup was not dramatic. There were no slammed doors. Grant simply admitted he did not think he was strong enough for this new life. He said she deserved someone better. The words sounded kind, but they left her feeling like a burden wrapped in polite language. After he moved out, the apartment felt too big and too quiet. Friends tried at first. They texted, invited her to dinners, promised to learn basic sign language. But weeks passed, and the effort faded. It was easier for them to stay in places where communication flowed naturally. Ilara understood that people prefer comfort. Still, understanding did not make it hurt less. Invitations slowed. Group chats went silent. She began declining offers before they could stop asking. Work became another reminder that she no longer fit easily. Meetings moved quickly, and even with captions and written notes, she felt one step behind. Co-workers were polite but unsure. She noticed how often people avoided eye contact during presentations, afraid of saying the wrong thing. She began working from home more often, but isolation followed her there too. Eventually, she resigned, telling herself freelance work would give her freedom. In truth, it gave her more empty hours. Over time, Alara formed a belief she did not say out loud. She was now too much work for anyone, too much effort, too much adjustment, too much patience required. It felt safer to withdraw before someone could confirm that fear again. She moved into the small duplex in Maple Hollow because it required no explanation. The rent was low, the neighborhood was quiet. No one asked questions. Her routine became simple and predictable. She woke early, checked emails, completed design projects, and ate meals alone at her kitchen table. The television stayed off because watching lips move without hearing them reminded her of everything she had lost. Evenings were spent scrolling through social media, observing other people's lives from a distance. She convinced herself that numbness meant strength. If she did not expect closeness, she would not be disappointed. Then she stepped inside the Rowan home. The air felt different immediately. It was quiet, but not empty. The walls carried warmth from shared routines. Family photos lined the hallway, including pictures of a smiling woman with kind eyes. Alara paused in front of one frame. Tessa Rowan stood between her husband and two small girls, sunlight catching her hair. The love in the image was clear. Alara did not need sound to recognize it. She felt something shift in her chest. This house had known loss too. The absence of Tessa was not hidden. It was honored. Her photos were not removed to make space for the future. They remained as part of the story. Alara understood that kind of grief. She carried her own invisible version of it every day. The difference was that here, loss had not turned into isolation. It had turned into resilience. Micah moved through the room with careful steadiness, offering her a place to sit without pressure. He did not over-explain. He did not stare. He simply gave her space. The twins stayed nearby, watching gently, as if making sure she felt safe. Alara noticed how the girls leaned naturally toward their father, and how he rested a hand lightly on their shoulders without thinking. This was a home built on staying. For the first time since her engagement ended, Alara did not feel like an inconvenience. No one rushed her. No one avoided her eyes. The girls communicated slowly in sign, proud but patient. Micah listened carefully, even when he did not fully understand. There was no pity in their faces, only curiosity and kindness. Something unfamiliar stirred inside her. The idea that she might not be too much work. The idea that someone could choose her presence without being forced. It was small and fragile, like a candle in a drafty room. She did not trust it yet, but it existed. Alara realized that loneliness does not always come from being alone. Sometimes it comes from not being chosen. Standing in that living room, surrounded by quiet warmth and evidence of survival, she felt the first hint that maybe she did not have to disappear to protect herself. Calla walked toward her slowly, holding a folded piece of paper. She did not speak. She simply placed it gently in Alara's hand. Alara unfolded the paper and saw 5 stick figures holding hands, and for a moment she did not know where she fit in that picture. Sometimes healing doesn't knock. It's invited in by small hands. After that first evening, Alara Quinn told herself she would not return. It had been too unexpected, too warm, too dangerous for someone who had learned to live without hope. But 2 days later, she found herself standing in the same kitchen, sketchbook open on the table, explaining shading techniques to Lyndon and Calla. She framed it as something simple. The girls liked to draw. She had experience in design. It was practical, useful, safe. At least that was what she told herself. The twins did not treat her visits like favors. They treated them like something normal. After school, they hurried through homework so they could sit beside Alara and practice both art and sign language. They were serious about learning. Every day they added new words to their growing list. Family, stay, together, home. Their hands moved more confidently now, and sometimes they corrected each other with quiet focus. They were not just learning signs, they were building connection. Micah Rowan watched all of this from a careful distance. At first he stayed near the doorway during Alara's visits, unsure of how much space to give. He still carried the instinct to protect what little piece his daughters had rebuilt. but over time he noticed small changes in the house. The air felt lighter on evenings when Alara was there. The girls laughed more freely. Even their homework seemed less heavy. Dinner became part of the routine without anyone formally deciding it would. Alara would start to gather her things, and Calla would gently place an extra plate on the table. Micah would pause for a moment, then nod quietly, accepting the unspoken request. They ate simple meals, pasta, soup, sandwiches, but the silence at the table no longer felt awkward. It felt shared. Micah made sure to sit where Alara could see his face clearly when he spoke. The twins translated when needed, proud of their growing skills. No one rushed. No one seemed embarrassed by pauses. At school, the girls carried that same loyalty. When classmates stared at Alara during a school art showcase where she volunteered to help, Lyndon stood straighter beside her. Calla signed proudly in front of others, unafraid of being different. They did not explain her presence with excuses. They simply acted as if she belonged, because in their hearts she already did. Micah began to understand something slowly and deeply. His daughters were choosing Alara. They were not doing it out of sympathy. They were doing it because they felt safe with her. As a single parent, Micah had spent years making every decision alone. He had learned to trust his judgment over everyone else's, but now he found himself watching his daughters' instincts instead. They had become emotional gatekeepers of their home, sensing who carried steady kindness. Still, fear lived quietly inside him. He had loved once and lost. The idea of allowing attachment again felt risky. He worried about what would happen if Alara decided to leave. He worried about how deeply the girls might feel that absence. Staying had been his promise after Tessa passed. He had stayed for his daughters no matter how hard it became. Could he risk inviting someone new into that fragile balance? Alara carried her own resistance. Every time she walked back to her duplex after an evening at the Rowan house, doubt followed her. She told herself she was temporary. She told herself that people always leave eventually. It would be smarter to step back now, before anyone relied on her too much. She noticed how easily the twins leaned against her during movie nights with captions on the screen. She noticed how Micah's guarded expression softened when he watched them together. The warmth felt real. That made it frightening. The bond forming between them was not loud or dramatic. It grew through shared homework sessions, quiet dinners, and steady presence. It was built not by blood, but by shared pain and mutual understanding. Alara understood what it meant to feel left behind. Micah understood what it meant to hold a family together through loss. The twins understood both, in their own small but powerful way. One evening, after Alara had spent hours helping Calla prepare an art piece for a school contest, she gathered her things a little earlier than usual. The thought had returned to her that maybe she should create distance. She signed goodbye gently, her smile careful. The twins hugged her without hesitation. Micah walked her to the door, his expression thoughtful but unreadable. As Alara stepped onto the porch, she felt the familiar pull to retreat into safety. Inside the house, she heard soft movement, but no sound reached her. She did not see Lyndon pause near the hallway corner. She did not see Calla tug lightly at her sister's sleeve. Micah, however, did. He had turned back toward the living room when he heard his daughters whispering, not realizing he was still within earshot. Lyndon's voice was steady but small as she spoke to Calla. She said she hoped Alara would never leave. Calla agreed quietly, adding that the house felt different now, like something missing had been found. Micah stood still in the hallway, those simple words settling heavily in his chest. His daughters were not just enjoying a visitor, they were choosing her as part of their world. The realization carried both hope and fear. He looked toward the front door, where Alara's shadow was fading from the porch light. Micah realized his daughters were already building a place for Alara in their hearts, and he had to decide whether he was brave enough to do the same. Leaving hurts, but staying can be even scarier. Micah Rowan had learned how to survive loss, but he had never learned how to risk love again. After overhearing Lyndon whisper that she hoped Alara would never leave, something shifted inside him. It was no longer just about his own guarded heart. It was about his daughters, about the quiet hope growing in their home. That hope felt fragile, and fragile things scared him more than loneliness ever had. Late that night, after the girls were asleep, Micah sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was still, lit only by the soft light above the stove. His eyes drifted to the framed photo of Tessa on the counter. He could almost hear the steady beeping of hospital monitors from 3 years ago, the way machines had measured time in cold numbers while he held her hand. He remembered the last promise he made to her. He had told her he would take care of the girls. He had told her he would stay strong for them. At the time, staying strong meant closing parts of himself off so he would not break. Now he wondered if that promise also meant allowing joy back into their lives. The thought made him uneasy. Feeling warmth toward Alara felt like stepping onto thin ice. He respected her strength. He admired the way she guided the girls with patience. He noticed how she listened fully, even without sound. But every time he felt that quiet pull toward her, guilt followed closely behind. He worried that opening his heart again might somehow erase the memory of what he had lost. He knew that was not true, yet grief does not always follow logic. Alara sensed the change before Micah said anything. During her next visit, she felt a careful distance in the way he moved. He was still kind, still attentive, but something in his posture had shifted. He lingered less at the dinner table. He spoke more briefly. She recognized that kind of withdrawal. She had lived through it before. Her mind quickly began building the same old story. She had stayed too long, grown too close, expected too much. That night, as she walked back to her duplex, she prepared herself emotionally to step away. It would hurt, but not as much as being asked to leave. She told herself she could reduce her visits slow. Why? She could claim work deadlines or personal reasons. She would not blame him. She understood fear. Still, the thought of not seeing the twins every week tightened her chest in a way she had not expected. The girls noticed the tension without anyone explaining it. Lyndon watched her father closely, seeing the familiar signs of retreat. Calla sensed Alara's quieter smile, the way it did not reach her eyes as easily. Children who grow up around grief become skilled at reading small shifts. They did not panic. They simply paid attention. One afternoon, while Micah stepped outside to take a phone call, Lyndon approached Alara in the living room. The sunlight through the window cast soft shadows across the floor. Lyndon's face was serious, her movements deliberate. She lifted her hands and signed slowly so there would be no mistake. "We choose you." Alara froze. The words were simple, but they carried more weight than anything spoken aloud. She searched Lyndon's eyes for doubt or pressure, but found neither. Calla stepped beside her sister and nodded firmly, repeating the same sign. There was no condition attached, no timeline, no expectation of perfection, just choice. For years, Alara had believed she was something people adjusted to until it became inconvenient. She had prepared herself to accept distance as normal. Being chosen without demand felt unfamiliar. It cracked something open inside her that she had sealed tightly after Grant left. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She signed back carefully, her hands trembling, thanking them not with words alone but with the softness of her expression. From the doorway, Micah witnessed the exchange. He did not hear the signs, but he understood their meaning by the emotion on their faces. In that quiet moment he realized his daughters had already made the decision he was still avoiding. They were not afraid of loving again. They were not afraid of loss stealing joy. They understood something he had forgotten. Staying does not guarantee safety, but it gives love a chance to grow. True love, he began to see, was not dramatic. It was not loud declarations or perfect timing. It was daily presence. It was showing up for dinner, for homework, for quiet evenings. It was choosing someone again and again, even when fear whispered that leaving might be easier. Micah felt the weight of his own hesitation. If he pulled away now, he would not only be protecting himself, he would be teaching his daughters that fear should decide their future. That was not the lesson he wanted them to carry. He had stayed through grief. He had stayed through exhaustion. Maybe now staying meant something different. Maybe it meant allowing happiness to exist alongside memory. He stepped fully into the room, his heart pounding harder than it had in years. Alara looked up at him, uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. The girls moved aside slightly, as if giving space for something important. Micah took a slow breath. He did not know much sign language. His movements would not be smooth, but he understood enough to try. He raised his hands carefully, forming the first imperfect sentence he had ever signed to her. Micah's fingers moved slowly, uncertain but brave, and Alara held her breath, waiting to understand what he was finally choosing to say. For years, silence meant abandonment. That night, it meant belonging. The storm rolled in without much warning. By late evening, dark clouds covered Maple Hollow, and the wind pressed hard against the windows of the Rowan house. Micah had just finished washing dishes when the lights flickered once, then twice, before the entire house went black. Outside, the neighborhood disappeared into darkness, leaving only the soundless flashes of lightning cutting across the sky. Alara, who had stayed later than usual to help the girls finish a school art project, felt the sudden shift in the room. She could not hear the thunder, but she could see the vibration in the windows and the quick movement of the twins' eyes. For a moment the house felt suspended in time. No television glow, no kitchen light, just shadows and breath. Micah moved calmly, reaching for the drawer where he kept flashlights and candles. Single-parent resilience had taught him to prepare for small emergencies. He lit several candles and placed them carefully around the living room. Soft golden light filled the space, gentle and steady. The storm outside continued, but inside, the atmosphere felt almost peaceful. The girls gathered blankets and sat close together on the floor. Alara joined them, her back resting against the couch. Without the usual distractions of light and routine, everything felt more honest. Faces were clearer in candlelight, expressions were easier to read. There was nothing to hide behind. Micah sat across from Alara, his features thoughtful in the flickering glow. The girls leaned against her comfortably, as if it had always been this way. No one spoke for a long moment. The silence was deep, but it did not feel empty. It felt shared. In that quiet space, Micah realized something important. Silence had once been a reminder of loss in this house. After Tessa passed, the absence of her laughter had echoed loudly in every room. But tonight, silence did not feel like something missing. It felt like something being built. He looked at Alara, who was watching the candle flame with distant eyes. He knew she had lived in silence longer than anyone in the room. For her, silence had meant rejection, distance, people slowly stepping away. He did not want her to carry that meaning anymore under his roof. Slowly, with careful intention, Micah shifted closer. His hands were steady but not perfect as he raised them into the soft light. He had been practicing basic sign language with the girls in recent weeks, staying up late after they slept to learn more. He was still learning, still unsure, but he was willing. He began to sign, his movements slower than Lyndon's, less graceful than Kala's. "You are not alone here." The words were not flawless, but the meaning was clear. Alara stared at his hands, then at his face. She saw effort, she saw choice. She saw a man stepping beyond fear because he wanted her to understand something without doubt. For a second she could not breathe. Those were the same words the girls had signed on the porch weeks ago, but now they carried the weight of adult promise. No condition, no timeline, just presence. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. They were not tears of sadness, they were tears that came from being seen fully and not turned away. She had not allowed herself to cry in front of anyone since losing Grant. She had believed, was transforming into chosen connection. No grand speeches, no dramatic promises. Just 4 people deciding to remain present through storm and silence alike. Hours later, when the power finally returned, the lights felt almost unnecessary. The house already felt full. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows as if nothing unusual had happened. The girls laughed at breakfast and Micah moved through the kitchen with quiet ease. Alara checked her phone out of habit while sipping coffee at the table. Her heart tightened when she saw the email notification. It was from a design firm in Chicago she had applied to months ago, back when she still believed starting over somewhere new was the only way to survive. The subject line read, "Offer letter." As the Rowan house filled with morning light, Alara stared at the job offer from another state, and wondered if staying was still the right choice. Sunlight catching their faces. The placement was intentional, not replacing, not erasing, expanding. The past and present shared the same wall, connected by choice. Alara looked at that wall and felt something steady settle inside her. She had once signed 3 words at a stranger's door because she believed they were true. "I'm alone." Now, standing in a home that had chosen her freely, she understood how much had changed. Love, she realized, is not about blood. It is about staying when someone signs they are alone and answering without words. It is about children brave enough to open doors adults fear. It is about a single father who stays even when staying hurts. It is about choosing and being chosen, again and again. Style closing line, because sometimes the quietest answer is the one that changes everything. If this story touched something quiet inside you, don't let that feeling fade when the screen goes dark. Stories like this grow stronger when more hearts hear them, so pass it forward to someone who might need it. And stay connected for more journeys that remind us what real love looks like. Now think about this. If someone stood at your door and signed, "I'm alone," would you open it, or would you let the silence answer for you?